You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with Heather Underwood, who is the CEO of EvoEndo. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you today. So tell our audience a little bit about your background and what you guys have been innovating these days.
Sure. So my background is actually in computer science. Started my career working at IBM, Microsoft, Zillow, and then really got interested in applying some of those skills to the healthcare space. So I did my PhD at the University of Colorado at Boulder in the Atlas program, which is an interdisciplinary program focused on everything and everything in between. But I was specifically writing clinical decision support software systems for nurses and midwives in Kenya. So I was actually spending quite a bit of time in Nairobi and working with the nurses and midwives there, particularly around maternal health and obstetrics and how to improve the standard of care there. I just really fell in love with the intersection of technology and healthcare and working directly with patients and providers. So after completing my PhD, I was a professor for a little while at CU Denver, really focusing on building innovative initiatives for students that were cross-disciplinary, focused on innovation, prototyping, and entrepreneurship. Wanted to get back into the startup scene. Was excited. You're
crazy.
I know. A little masochistic, maybe. No. But really wanted to get back to solving those direct problems. And so I participated in the Stanford Biodesign program, which is basically a very intense 10 and a half months postdoc program for medical device innovators. And then after completing that program, I knew I wanted to come back to Colorado. And that's when I met Dr. Joel Friedlander, who is our co-founder and chief medical officer at EvoEndo. And the rest is history. So I joined the team at the end of 2019.
Right before the pandemic.
Right before the pandemic. Yes, we can definitely talk about how that impacted us.
Well, let's just talk about it now.
Sure.
What were you thinking December 2019, January, right? First quarter 2020. And then how did that transition? What changed?
Yeah. So a little bit of context on what EvoEndo does and what we're innovating first. Yeah. So we are a pediatric first gastroenterology company, and we are building sterile single-use platforms to enable unsedated transnasal endoscopy. So to break that down a little bit.
Now say that 5 times fast, right?
Oh, I know. Wait till you hear the name of the procedure. It's a mouthful. I'll only say it once. But anyway, so right now, the standard of care for pediatric patients, if they need to go get an upper endoscopy for anything, abdominal pain, is to put them under general anesthesia. So the full surgical procedure in the operating room, needles, fasting, the whole 9 yards. And these procedures only take, 5 minutes, but it's a whole day lost of school or work.
Sure.
So our co-founder, Dr. Joel Friedlander, and his colleagues in the Aerodigestive Medicine program here at Children's of Colorado pioneered a way to do an unsedated procedure on kids that still takes about 5 minutes, but the patient is awake the whole time. So EvoEndo was created to really build the system that they needed to do these procedures in a clinic or procedure room, as opposed to the operating room. So we have designed a sterile single-use transnasal gastroscope capable of going comfortably through pediatric nasal anatomy, looking at the esophagus, stomach, and small intestine, doing biopsies so you can get that diagnostic test results. And the patient wears a virtual reality headset during the procedure, no sedation, no anesthesia. They go back to school right afterwards. So that's really what we do.
Is I'm familiar with that. So my daughter was diagnosed with papillomatosis when she was around 2 and had ended up having 25 plus surgeries and going to an ENT often and them having to do the endoscopy. Now, she had the little camera that went down and wasn't sedated, wasn't in an operating room or anything. Maybe that's because as she got older, they were doing that, whereas she was younger, she had to be sedated. I'm not sure, but unfortunately, I'm all too familiar with how awful that procedure can be.
Yeah. So the ENT doctors have been doing the transnasal procedure without sedation for a long time, but their scopes are much shorter. So our scope applied to gastroenterology, our scope is the only one where you can actually do a full GI procedure going transnasally.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Then going back to the COVID question. So I joined, like I said, right at the end of 2019, ahead of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so we are a single-use platform. So the whole scope is disposed after each procedure. Mm-hmm. So a new scope every time, which is great. They get the latest technology. You're not worried about reprocessing scopes. And the FDA has issued numbers of guidance documents at this point about the infection risk of reusable scopes after reprocessing. And so our scope system was really designed to mitigate that infection risk. And this was all happening before the pandemic.
Right.
So then in terms of tailwinds of COVID, both tailwinds and headwinds, but
of course.
Tailwinds, I think the focus on infection risk and how big of an issue that is in hospitals, as well as patients not wanting to be in the hospital for long periods of time for elective procedures, really, I think, pushed the field of single-use scopes across the board forward in a really big way. So I think we've gotten a lot more interest just in our single-use platform because of COVID.
That's great. I mean, there are those that have suffered tremendously because of the headwinds around COVID, and there's those that have had a lot of success because of those tailwinds that you're just describing. Yeah.
Yeah. The headwinds for us, really had to do with FDA and then also with manufacturing delays on parts. I think we saw everything start to get a little funny when it came to inventory and timelines and everything from construction and house building materials. I was also in my personal life dealing with that. Right. And then just delays on some of our key components to actually build our system. But then the FDA too was also just very swamped, looking at EUAs and COVID vaccines and all of the important stuff around the pandemic that was coming out. Mm-hmm. So we got caught in that delay a little bit as well.
Sure. So earlier you touched on this medical device innovation hub or community that you were a part of. Help me understand or help us understand, what's changing? What's new and exciting when it comes to medical device innovation and being able to commercialize those maybe more successfully or even faster?
Yeah. It's a great question. And so I was part of the Stanford biodesign program, which, is really on the cutting edge of thinking about how to design, really starting with a needs approach, understanding those clinical problems. There's a clinical observation period where you are working directly with physicians and patients, getting a deep understanding of those needs, and then prototyping, iterating, validating your solutions. And so, I think the more that medical device starts with that real clinical need and then drives the solutions out of the clinical needs, the more successful you're going to be when you get to commercializing those medical devices. And so, I think that is one of the differentiators for EvoEndo. Our system was really born out of this clinical need in pediatrics where there are no systems approved for pediatric use. And the standard of care was so traumatic for patients that were needing these procedures that we really developed a system to change that dramatically. I think a lot of the other single-use scope manufacturers at this point are really just looking at the existing technology and making single-use versions of it at a lower cost, and they're really missing that clinical need, which I think has always been our focus. So,
which is not rocket science in one hand, right? Because it seems like you would start off with the need, but it's also worth just reminding our audience that are in the trenches, because sometimes we can get so caught up in the technology that we build out a solution and then try to go out and find a problem as opposed to starting off with the need. And that's something that I noticed early on when you and I were talking before, is that you started off with that need, to me, which is like one of the first steps of being able to have commercial success, is being able to identify the need and then being able to test that business idea before you're pouring millions of dollars into it.
Yeah, I think it also gives you a lot of freedom too, because you have a very clear mission and need, but then it gives you flexibility and freedom to adjust your business model or adapt your product to really constantly better meet that need, as opposed to being really locked into a technology. And, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So
Right. Yep. The old adage.
Yeah.
So obviously, commercializing medical devices takes a long time.
Yes.
And one of the things that I'm seeing is that leaders of med device companies are becoming more creative or innovative, even in their commercialization strategy, in this period where you don't have FDA clearance. Is there anything that you're doing to try to cultivate demand, or anything that you're putting in place so that way when you do get the FDA clearance, you're ready to hit the ground running and you maybe already have something in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're definitely being creative, just because the FDA process is such a lengthy one.
Yep.
So the transnasal endoscopy procedure, as you mentioned, has been around in ENT for a long time, and in GI in other countries. The US, GI docs have not historically adopted transnasal endoscopy very widely, in large part because there hasn't been equipment that makes that a comfortable procedure for patients.
Yep.
However, we knew we were going to run into some adoption issues just on the procedure side itself. So we have spent a lot of our time developing a comprehensive training kit, an online education platform, and then building out our clinical specialist team so that we can really support these GI physicians who are learning a new procedure, largely due to patient demand. So patients are really driving the adoption of this procedure among GI physicians across the US. And they're coming to us wanting to know how to do it and wanting to know how to get trained up very quickly.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. So, we're spending a lot of time going out, training these centers, helping them know how to talk to patients, how to talk about the procedure, and how to grow that practice in their hospitals.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. So one of the things that I was talking to an innovator about a couple of months ago was this kind of, I don't know if I'd say limbo period, but like this period within that we're talking about, right before the FDA approval, where you're trying to raise money, maybe trying to get some VC money in, but also having to be really mindful of the customer acquisition cost. So that way it doesn't look like you don't have a viable business model because no revenue is coming in, but you really do. Yeah,
it's a tricky time. I like thinking about it as limbo. for us, there's a lot of opportunity in this window. I think that we have the luxury, I guess, of spending a lot of time on those market development efforts, both physician and patient outreach. But yeah, trying to raise money when you don't have revenues coming in and you haven't vetted your business model is a tricky one. We have partnered with a distribution partner. We had a press release come out yesterday. So Microtech Endoscopy is one of the, I would say, up and coming GI distributors and manufacturers in the US. They have a large international presence as well. But as a small, lean startup for our commercialization strategy, it really makes sense to, leverage a commercial partner's sales force so that when we go out, they're the experts at the sale, and we are the experts on the procedure and the technology and really cultivating those pediatric GI connections and doing a lot of the market development. So that has also been really, I think, essential to keeping our cash runway very lean, but then also having a strong business model and commercial sale strategy that we can pitch to investors when we go out to raise funds.
I think that that's just so smart. And I am seeing a lot more health innovators move in that direction because of all the challenges. I mean, sometimes even when you're entrenched in healthcare, you can still have challenges getting access to key stakeholders. But it certainly, if you haven't been in healthcare or you haven't been in healthcare in the specific sector that your innovation is focused on, even more so since COVID, getting access to providers and hospital systems and key stakeholders in this ecosystem, it is so challenging. And so talk about being able to fast track or accelerate the demand and adoption, the awareness and the demand and potentially even adoption by going the distributor route.
Yeah, I mean, it's been key to our strategy, I would say, and it has allowed us to really focus on what our expertise is, and then partner with a great team that has relationships throughout the U.S.
Without investing in the army of salespeople. I love salespeople, but it can be expensive, especially at this stage. Yeah. So let's talk about the amount of money that not necessarily the amount, but let's talk about the amount that you raised, but also let's talk about what this fundraising journey has been like for you.
Yeah. So we raised our seed round, which you are referring to, earlier this year. And that was our first equity round. We had a lot of new investors coming in that round, but also a lot of our existing investors who have been supporting and supportive of us from the beginning. So being a pediatric focused company, it has been difficult in the past to raise traditional VC money. A lot of the VCs look at the pediatric market and don't see the returns that they're looking for because it is a smaller market. However, not only are we applicable to pediatrics, but anything that's going to be more comfortable going into a pediatric anatomy is going to be a lot more comfortable for adults. So there is a need in the adult population for our system. And so trying to make that case when we've been going out to raise money, talking to investors, has been a challenge, to say the least. So a lot of our investors to date have been philanthropic family funds, family offices, people who really care or who are personally invested in our pediatric mission. And making these procedures safer and faster. So that was where a lot of our investment came from. We are going to be going out to raise our Series A, which will be our commercial round early next year. And I think the progress that we've made, even since we raised that seed round, hopefully will really demonstrate to some of those traditional VCs that the pediatric market may be small, but if you have the whole thing, it is a very significant market share of overall endoscopy in the United States.
Just watch you do it, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the lessons learned along the way? I know that there's a segment of our audience that are in the trenches right now, and they are pitching their company over and over and over. And it can be a very difficult and deflating season. So what are some of the lessons that you learned along the way that might be helpful to our audience?
Yeah, when it comes to fundraising, I like to just turn it into a process, just kind of like a assembly line in a way. So kind of taking out that emotional response of the rejection, if you don't get a call back or if they don't want to continue doing due diligence with you. And so I really start with a list of comparable companies, work backwards in PitchBook or Crunchbase or whatever, and find the investors in those comparable companies, create a really long list, go to LinkedIn and see if there's any shared connections, because those are always better warm intros than cold calls.
Sure.
And then you just work your way down the list. And at least for me, you just practice the pitch and, you tailor it every time. You do your homework on who you're talking to. And then you just knock them down. So you spend a couple hours on a weekend or something creating all these lists and putting all the contacts together. And then I think it's been so important for me to hire a great team and then really rely on them to do their jobs. And so that I can kind of have big chunks of time where I can go out and do this fundraising and just book call after call after call.
It is a roadshow.
It is.
Whether
it really
it's virtual or not, it's a roadshow.
Yeah. And actually virtual has made it a lot easier, right?
Yes.
So I think, you can just contact more people faster because of the virtual world we live in. So
you touched on great team, great partners. What makes great team or great partners?
Oh, so many things. We've hired a number of people this year following our raise in the spring. And, it's about cultural fit. I mean, it's obvious about expertise and their backgrounds, but for me, it's about how well they work with the other team members, what they bring to the table, and if they fit really well into our culture and if they really believe in the mission. If they don't have class 2 510K experience, in GI, but, and their experience is more on PMA products and cardiology, for example, but they're a really strong fit and, they bring that diversity of perspective to the table. I'm going to hire that person over someone who maybe isn't as good of a cultural fit, but has the exact right skills. So that has worked out really well for us. I think being a good judge of character and, just trying to really get to know the person as opposed to just their resume.
Sure.
I think there's an adage, hire slowly, fire quickly. I think taking your time and really knowing who you're hiring and getting the right people in is key to building a great team.
I think that's so important for every organization, but I think that it's even more critical when you're a startup or emergent healthcare company, because those are like that's the foundation, right? Those early higher decisions are like building the company. And so it's just so important that we get that right.
Yeah. And, that also is kind of my philosophy when it comes to fundraising and being really capital efficient. I will cut people last. People are what make everything work on a team and in a company.
Yeah.
And so, we are a really lean team, but that's where we invest our capital in the people that make it all possible. So,
yeah. So what does the future hold, right? As you're kind of looking into 2022, believe it or not.
I know. Where did 2021 go?
I don't know. Remember when we were so eager for 2020 to be behind us and we were like, come on, 2021. And we we're like, damn, 2021 kind of stinks in a lot of ways too. So come on, 2022.
I know. Just look forward.
What's on the horizon as you're kind of looking at the different new commercialization milestones? What are some of those key decisions that you're making in the future?
Yeah, well, optimism. 2022 is going to be a very exciting year for us. We are anticipating FDA clearance early next year, and then launching with our commercial partner, kind of rolling out to a few of our key accounts throughout the US, and then doing a hard launch, mid next year to all the GIs around the country. So
very exciting.
It's a super exciting year for us.
Very exciting. So as we just kind of wrap up here, is there anything else that you would want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, so much. I think we've covered a lot of ground just on, challenges and opportunities. I think there's two sides to every situation, and looking at it as a challenge or seeing it as an opportunity. And I think that's really been one of the strengths of our team, is that we have found the opportunity in every challenge that has been thrown our way. And, I would say don't lose hope. There's a great community of mentors and advisors, and, you're not alone is what I would share
out there that are trying to transform healthcare in their own little way. Yeah.
And so, I think that has been absolutely essential for me, finding networks of other startup CEOs, and, even if they're not directly in the same field, just building that community so that when you do hit hard times, you have people to, go grab a drink with and, share war stories about the process. And it just helps to keep going. So.
I was reading a book the other day, and they had a chapter, and it was not about entrepreneurship at all, but the topic of this chapter was comeback artist. And I just really started to think that, for all the hats that an innovator might wear or titles that they might have, comeback artist should be one of them.
Yeah, I love that. It is a constant process of, redefining yourself.
Resilience.
Yeah. And actually on the book recommendation front, I just started rereading The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben. It's one of my favorite books because he just tells it like it is and doesn't try and sugarcoat how hard, the startup process is. And, you can only be so prepared, you're not going to have every situation perfectly mapped out. So I would recommend that one too.
Okay. So say the title again.
The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Okay. All right. Yeah. You heard it here. So how do folks get a hold of you if they want to follow up with you after the show?
Yeah. So you can reach out. My email is just heather@evoendo.com. You can go to our website, evoendo.com. And on our website, there's a contact form. So if you are a physician or, a hospital administrator that is looking to learn more about unsedated T&E, and maybe schedule a demo or training session, there's a contact form on our website for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me, Heather. Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.